The quality of relationships determines the quality of your life. So, if relationships are so important, what can we do to be intentional about the relationships that we're choosing to have or not choosing to have? I'm excited to introduce you to my friend Paul Teller as we have a conversation all about relationships and the power of the right relationships at the right time. So, today we're going after the power of the right relationships, not the wrong ones, the right ones. Paul, thanks for joining in today.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
So let's start with let's define the terms that we're going to use, meaning let's define what a relationship is in the first place. What comes to your mind, man?
Wow, great question. Here's what comes to my mind, and that's a story of a relationship. When I was thinking about this, I was thinking about relationships that had impact in my life, and maybe this will help us kind of come up with the definition of what a relationship is, because I think we would all have an idea, and yet to define it, I don't know. Maybe that's something we can work on together. I remember it was my senior year in high school,
Mhm.
going into college, and I was still figuring out all kinds of things. I had a really rough, when I say rough childhood, family life was great. School was awful. I got made fun of a lot. Um, Looking back, it was the lack of relationships. Fast forward into my senior year, going into college, I got involved with campus life and that sort of stuff. And I met someone, and he was older than me. His name was Kevin, and at the time he had a wife, still has a wife. Her name was Tiffany. And Chris, they poured into me, and they helped me understand that I wasn't defined by what I was categorized as in high school. They helped me understand that that my identity wasn't in what other people either said about me or even what I, began to think or say about myself as a result of being picked on and made fun of for so much. So uh, when I think about that, and I think about Kevin, and we haven't talked in probably, goodness gracious, I'm 40, probably 25 years. And if I was to still list on a piece of paper who were the most significant people in my life or the relationships that meant a lot to me, Kevin would be at the top of the list, because he met me where I was.
Mhm.
And to me, I think a relationship, when I even look at it down here on a piece of paper that I wrote it down, it's the first part of relationship is
Mhm.
relate. So I think it has something to do with relatability. And in order to be relatable, there's this, and this is tough for me. It's the journey I'm on. A sense of vulnerability that we've got to offer to people, so that we're able to begin to attract and showcase what our commonalities are, and how we can relate to one another.
Yeah, that's solid. I think about when I think about relationship, Paul. I love the relate part of it because if I think about, I was recording a podcast and this guy asked me, he flipped the script on me. He said, "Chris, what did you learn as a result of the book that you wrote?" And after thinking about it, Paul, and giving him a answer that I actually put some thought into, it's
Hmm.
like, man, my life has been dramatically impacted by the people that have shown up in my life at the right time. It's like when the student is ready, the teacher appears type of thing. And a part of that is to be able to relate to someone. So I could appreciate what you're saying about the relate part of the relationship. And I also think about, what was it, Susan Scott in her book, Fierce Conversation? Like the conversation is the relationship. So it's like the relate part, and I would say the quality of the relationship may be determined by the quality of the conversation, meaning, um, like if I think about with my wife, for example, it's like an ongoing, not a once and done thing. So it's kind of a evolving thing that's not stagnant.
Yeah.
So that's
And it takes work. That's the part that I'm learning, is
yeah.
that these relationships that matter, the relationships that allow us
Mhm.
to thrive, um, it they take work.
Mhm.
And I think as someone who loves to work and also loves my free time,
Mhm.
I am learning currently right now, Chris, that my professional life is 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 hinged directly to my relationships. And and I've put together uh, plans for my money. I've put together plans for my lead generation. I put together a plan for marketing. I put a plan together for all of these areas in my business. And the one that's missing is a plan for my relationships. And looking at the relationships as a integral part of my growth is something that I have never was taught, and sort of just didn't really think it was important until as of late. And that's where this whole idea of relationships that matter and who we're in business with matters
Yeah.
is really a big part of my thinking right now. Because in the past, and you know me from lots of different circles, and yet from my past, I'm still a pretty private person. So relationships are tough for me. Relationships are tough for me. In that we don't need to go into a whole counseling session of why they're tough for me. And yet
Sure.
relationships are tough, and it's part of vulnerability, and it's a part of that relationships take time, and time is important to me. So I hold it accountable. So anyway, I think that what is a relationship? It's a work in progress between two or more human beings, where we have something in common, or we have something that we can relate together as a common point of interest. What do you think? I mean, I don't know,
That's
working
fair.
definition.
That's pretty solid. I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that it's work, because it is. Because I think sometimes when it comes to relationship, part of my perspective has been like, man, some people are just so relational. They just seem to make it look easy. Then other people, it's like pulling teeth. And man, relationships like that. That is, at least for me, it's a challenge. And I mean, just keeping it real, man. Like especially the interfamily relationships, meaning that there's conflict, and I tend to have all this grace and patience for people that I go to church with, people that I'm in the business world with, and yet sometimes the people I'm the most harsh with and impatient
Mhm.
that challenge me relationally is within my family tree, man. So I like the fact that I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that it is work, because I think about it, that means it takes effort. It's not going to happen automatically. I have some skin in the game when it comes to the relationships that I have or don't have.
And I think that's an important part to even think about, and the work that comes as a result of this conversation is the organic relationships. And by that I mean it's the connections, it's the personality maybe that sometimes we feel like, oh, they've got a lot of relationships. What I'm studying and what I'm thinking a lot about is it's the well, you're most like your five closest friends, whether you think about a financial or that wealth building idea of that you're the average net worth of your five mentors. That's the work I'm doing on. It's the relationships that are interdependent. It's not the codependent, and it's not the dependent. It's interdependent, and it's um I guess I would liken it to mentorship, kind of this idea of the relationships that matter and the power of relationships. Or it's on one side of the coin, who's helping me become a better version of myself, and then it's also who am I helping become the better version of themselves. That's this power of the right relationships.
So let's talk about with why it's so important that we choose the right relationships. And then we can go into some of the tacticals, like as we're both learning about this, like what are some things that we're doing to take steps that direction, to be intentional with the relationships.
Yeah, the right relationships matter, and I think it's something that we all probably know. You and I certainly know this. It's just to be reminded, because what's the opposite or the inverse of the right relationships?
The wrong ones.
Right? So why
Ouch.
not have the right relationships? Because if
Yeah.
we're not having the right relationships, that means by default we're having the
The wrong ones.
right, which is going to
Right.
get us less of what we want, or more of what we're getting. So I think that's the importance of having the right relationships, because the opposite would be having the wrong relationships. And
Yeah.
we all know what that would get us. So the right
Right.
relationships, and I think it matters too, because no one succeeds alone.
Mm-hmm.
No one succeeds alone. I think about this was an aha for me when I speaking of Brody and my son and your son, they both love to fish. And
Right.
speaking of when Brody and I are sitting there waiting for hours, it seems like, for blast off on these fishing tournaments, I asked him who Michael Jordan was, and he said, "Oh, he's the guy that created the cool shoes,
Hmm.
the Jordans." And I was like, you don't really even know Michael Jordan. Like, you don't really even understand. That was my first, I'm getting old. I sound like my
Yeah.
dad type of thing. Anyway, that being said, I think about Michael Jordan and I think about the relationships that he had. You know, the Joker didn't make his high school varsity team and yet went on to revolutionize basketball. And it
Right.
was the relationships that he had with his team and his coaches that really, I would have thought,
Mhm.
defined and sort of created the basketball that we know today. So relationships matter because no one succeeds alone, and who we're in business with matters.
Yeah.
And I think it's the part that no one succeeds alone that
Mhm.
is why the relationships matter. And it's different relationships. It's not like we were saying earlier, it's not oh, I've got a lot of friends. It's the relationships that move us forward and I think spur us to be the best versions of ourselves personally and professionally.
Yeah. I had there's we have some common friends, and last week it was a fun week, man. It was my birthday week, and birthdays are special to me, Paul. I feel like God revealed to me that birthdays are significant to him, and so I've been paying attention to what happens my birthday week for about the past 2 or 3 years as a result of that. And I was able to I hired two coaches. I invested in myself, meaning I spent more money ever investing into coaches.
That's how we
And
feel good about those investments.
say that again.
I said that's the language that we use so that we feel good about
100%.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So, um, Diana Kokoska, mutual friend, and then, and she has a inner circle with John Maxwell, and then a personal brand coach named Omar out of Las Vegas. So my birthday week, I was able to go spend time with John Maxwell and Diana, and then which was just a different dynamic because I've been in a room with thousands of people with
Yep.
John Maxwell, and yet to be in a room with 32 other people is just a different dynamic, a different level of experiencing him. And then after that, I went to Las Vegas with my wife to spend time with my personal branding coach. Then the reason I bring this up is because, like, one of the ways that I've been intentional about the relationships that I have, it's like there's a book called Who Not How. And the premise of the book is like, who are you missing?
Hmm.
And I've been thinking about, okay, what's some areas of my life I want to advance in? Meaning that I'm so committed to this future vision of who I see myself as a future, the vision that my wife and I have for us and our family, that I'm willing to write the check for it. Meaning I'm willing to pay the price and to sacrifice. It's not coming easy or naturally. I'm being intentional and betting. I'm willing to write the check for it. So some of the I just think about our conversation, and when it comes to John Maxwell in particular, he said something I've never heard him say before, that he has a list, a running list of people that God has sent to his life at the right time. Sometimes they're friendships that are brief, and then sometimes they're decade after decade. And I thought to myself, wow, I admire John Maxwell for so many reasons. And yet, even to someone like John Maxwell, who I look up to, he realizes that he is who he is as a result of the people he's been blessed to that have invested in his life. And so it did something on it just reassured me that I'm making the right moves, because a lot of times I'm like, man, it's the life of faith, meaning I'm not necessarily 100% sure. I just feel like that's the direction, and sometimes I feel more strong than other times. And yet, just hearing John Maxwell saying he is who he is and has what he has as a result of this list of about 200 people that have invested in him, it just did something on the inside that just reassured me that it was worth the price I paid to be in that room in that moment.
It reminds me of of a myth, and that the self-made person is even possible. That's a myth. You
Mm.
know, I hear people, you know, that might be first generation millionaires or first generation entrepreneurs, and one of the things that they might say, or we might even think they're saying, and if they don't say it, is that they did it all themselves. Like I'm a self-made man, or I'm a self-made human being, or a
Right.
self-made millionaire. And the reality is that's the myth.
Hmm.
I get what they're saying, and yet the reality is no man or woman has ever succeeded alone. There is always someone there.
That's a good point.
There's
So,
always
what's some
someone
of the
there.
ways that you're being intentional, Paul, to be around, or to form a relationship, or to strengthen a relationship with kind of who might be on your missing person report?
Well, and so that's what I've been working on, and whether I'm calling it a network audit or a business plan around relationships, because
Mhm.
you mentioned something that was profound to me, and that's the who is missing. Because I
Mm.
think that as driven people and successful people, motivated and learning based, we can do the what and the how, right? The what do I need to do to get back on track, and how do I need to do it? Which are all phenomenal questions. I think we go one or two more levels up, and we really get to the who. So one of the things, Chris, that I've been working on is just it's an audit of my network, and I it's on a piece of paper, and it's my name's in the middle, and it's got people of like who am I helping build wealth, and I've got circles, and I've got 5 circles, and I'm working on filling those circles, and if I can't fill them, then that becomes an action item. I'm also doing, who am I helping become a better version of themselves, a better husband, and I've got those circles, and then I've also got on the other side, it's who's helping me become more financially literate, who's helping me think and rethink investment strategies, and who's helping me uh, think about determine like who's helping me think bigger. So that's what I'm just calling it an audit, and I'm starting with being honest with myself of like, okay, it's not who do I follow on Facebook, or what books am I reading. It's the relationship part of the who person. And what I'm learning is that I've got a lot of people in my network and not a lot of relationships.
Mm.
And that was a bit sobering, in that I thought I was doing okay, or I thought they were in my brain, until I started putting the pen to paper. I thought I was better off than I really was, and that was a huge aha for me. Is until I started, which I love it. Like John Maxwell, you said, putting it like on the list, until I started putting words in there, and then asking myself the question: are you serious, Paul? Like, if I called that person right now, would they answer the phone?
Mm.
That's the heaviness, and that's the weightedness of doing this audit of who my network or who my relationships are. And then if there's a blank, then I'm working to go find it, and they
Mm.
already probably exist in my world. It's just I'm not working to develop the relationship.
That makes sense. Um, so okay, so you actually put the pen to the paper and write it out. Man, that's smart. There's a Stephen King. Like, he's somebody I just usually, he would not be on my radar to read his book, and yet a mentor friend of mine, David Higginbotham out of Texas, recommended this book called On Writing by
Hmm.
Stephen King. And there's two things he says that just was intriguing as I listened to my first Stephen King book about his journey of being a writer and becoming a writer. His language is interesting. He said that great ideas seem to fall down from the sky, and it's important that we write them down to capture them once we get them. I'm thinking, bro, that's different language than I would use. It sounds like God's giving you an idea, write that bad boy down. And yet I appreciated his language as he was trying to figure out how to describe it. The other thing that he said, Paul, is that when it comes to writing down, it's writing is thinking at its highest level, because it's one thing to actually just have all of these loose end random thoughts in my mind. It's a whole nother thing to write it down and form a complete sentence or finish the thought, as opposed to these loose ideas just wandering in my mind. So I love your intentionality to actually write it down, just like we would a business plan or setting goals or anything that's important to us, really.
Well, yeah, because we know the percentages, whether they could range probably within 10 or 15%, and yet we know that the people who actually write their goals down and visit them every day and even share them with other people are far more likely to achieve the goals. So if again, it's this whole concept of, we've got a written lead generation plan. We've got a written financial plan where we track our net worth and we look at those numbers and we visit with them. And I'm just creating this awareness around why am I not? That was the question that sent me on this journey, is why am I not doing the same thing with relationships?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if I was coaching one of my clients and I was to say, hey, what's your plan for next year? And they were just to start talking, I would say, no, show it to me. And I want it on one piece of paper so we can be on literally the same page. And if they aren't able to do that, that's number one. We got to get the ideas and the thoughts down on paper, because if we don't have clarity, then we have no idea of what the technique is to then execute on what it is that we are desiring. So step one is clarity. And for me, I don't really know of any other way to gain clarity than taking it from this idea, this creative concept, into something on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't paint. I can barely draw. So I write it. And yet other people could paint it, which I think is brilliant. And yet I barely can write, honestly.
So if step one was clarity and there was a step two, what do you think step two would be?
I think step two would be the actual work, the action. So
Okay.
it's figure out, and I've whether it was chunk it down. So if it was the clarity of like, here's my network map, and
Yeah.
and there's 20 spots, and I'm making the number 20 because for some people it may be 25, for maybe some people it's 5, and yet
Sure.
10 of the 20 are missing. So it's identify and then chunk it down to say, okay, I'd like to have this network map filled in by the end of the year. I've got 30 days or 26 days minus Christmas, and how many days do I have? How many how many people can I have coffee with? And then I
Mm-hmm.
would say, just be vulnerable and find out, and just say, hey, I'd love to get together and have a cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm. I think it'd be beneficial to focus on like why it's challenging.
Hmm.
Um, because my temptation is just like in coaching is to skip over. I mean, there's the positive present. Hey, everything's good. I like to live in that land. And then there's the negative present, which is like the pain point. And so when it comes to like what is challenging about relationships, um, one of the things that I've discovered and I've been just growing into, Paul, is to be a peacemaker, to be the person that says, "Hey, there's an elephant in the room. Let's go there. Let's talk about it so we can move forward in our relationship." So we have this tradition in our household where we go around and we say what we love and appreciate about that person, in particular on their birthday. We
Hmm.
call it being in the hot seat. And one of the things I'm always like when my wife shares, I love what the kids say. I love everybody else's input, but there's just something that when my wife says what she loves and appreciate about me, like, man, I'm just all ears paying extra close attention. And she actually shared 2 days ago, Paul, that one of the things that she loves about me is that in particular over this past year, I really have been stepping up to get the people in our front room and say, hey, let's sit down. Let's talk through this. Let's hear your perspective. Why am I bringing that up? Be a peacemaker, relationship. Oh, what's challenging about relationships? So for me, Paul, like what's challenging about relationships is that they're messy, man, and often and uncomfortable. Meaning, in order for the relationship to move forward, if there's conflict, it requires someone to take the lead in having the conversation. And I've just decided I'm going to be the leader, meaning initiate what feels awkward and uncomfortable in order to have peace, because my wife is a peacemaker. So like, man, if the energy's off, if there's just something off, she's not at peace until it's been resolved so we can move forward. And I love that because part of the challenges I've had is like in the family tree, man, there's just been divorces, right? Right. So there's been conflict and not able to move forward. So people get divorced for whatever reason. And yet I understand that everybody's doing the best they can with where they're at. And yet divorce has been a big part of the family tree, not just once, but multiple times. And I just, for my wife and I, we've just decided, man, like, we don't want to just write people off and ignore them and act like they don't exist when they're family members. And so I think, speaking for myself, one of the things challenging about relationships is the nature of relationship is conflict. So it's not a matter of if there's conflict or not. Every relationship has conflict. It's just a matter of navigating in a way that's healthy and vulnerable
Yep.
and be willing to care enough to have the conversation, I guess.
Yeah, you mentioned it. It's conflict. Yes, it's vulnerability,
Mhm.
and it's also work, like we talked about earlier. And I
Yeah,
think
effort.
that's one of the reasons that that I believe a lot of people struggle with this idea of it's the relationships that matter, is because it takes work and it takes thinking. And we are busier today than we've ever been. We're more involved, and you know, right now, Chris. And again, I don't want to say I'm going to open up a can, and yet what I'm
Sure.
seeing and reading and understanding is that we feel like we're in relationship with someone because we like it or thumbs it or double click it on Instagram or whatever. All I know is when my daughter, I'm looking at a picture on her Instagram, she's like, "Don't touch the screen. You'll like it or heart it or something." So, and I think that that's the challenge is we are getting the dopamine hit in
Mhm.
our for a second because we're scrolling through social media and all the friends that we think we have that we liken that to the relationship, and we might give them a heart, a comment, oh, that's so cute.
Right.
And we're feeding the desire to be in connection, and yet it's not sustainable. So that's the work
Mhm.
part is it's not just a a go comment on 10 people's Facebook post and like 10 people's
Mhm.
Instagram and direct message 5 people to move your business forward. Yes. And
Right.
what we're talking about is something way different than moving your business forward. It's the relationship part. And it
Mhm.
takes work and it takes time and vulnerability and yeah, all those things. So I think that's the resistance
Mhm.
is we want to look for, and I'm guilty of it too, man. I'm guilty of it too. Like, hey, I want to find the quickest, easiest way to get this task done.
Yeah.
And I think that in relationships, our culture of being always connected, I think that we are convincing ourselves that the relationships that matter can be built and strengthened through a, let me be careful how I say it, because there is a place for social media and Zoom, even though
Sure.
we're not in the same room. We're
Right.
having a conversation with technology. So
Right.
I'm not saying it's either way 100%. We also I think need to get real clear of, hey, am I willing to do the work that it takes? Because if
Mhm.
we can get right with that answer, then
Mhm.
the rest of it is okay. And yet, I
Yeah.
think before with anything, we've got to sit with ourselves and say, am I willing to do the work that it's going to take? And if the
Mhm.
answer
Great
is yes,
question.
move forward. If the answer is no, then my encouragement to the people who I coach, and I think you and I have talked about it, it's okay.
Right.
Let your no be no and let your yes be yes. Be where your feet are. So figure out what you're saying yes to, and by
Yeah.
golly, say no to a whole heck of a lot.
Yeah.
Instead of, I think what I have a tendency to do, and we say yes to a whole bunch. We say yes to a
Mhm.
whole bunch, which makes then the key relationships all the more difficult.
Yeah. That's true, man. So we got clarity, we got chunk it down, and my coach was just talking about having at least 3 points and having, if you could have it to where it's all that starts with the same letter, like that's powerful. So
Yeah.
let's see if we can come
You
up with,
got
is
this,
there
Chris. Yeah.
another,
Yeah.
you got it already?
No. I was
Okay.
saying like, yeah, have the 3 points that all start with the
Yeah.
same, and then the call to action, and boom, we got it done. We just did a
There we
sermon.
go, man. Effective communication. So with what would be if there were a third after clarity, chunk it down. What is there a third? You
That
think?
starts with a C. I would say commitment.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, because at that point, when I think about commitment, the definition of commitment for me is do whatever it takes. So for
Yeah.
me, commitment and action go hand in hand. So I would think the third one would be commit to the plan, and that
Hmm.
that would be just get into action and commit to being vulnerable and figuring out what to say and be okay with the process. So commit to the process in that everyone that you have on your, let's say, your friends list, and that you might, step one, have a couple things in common so that there's the relatability, and then you start to pour into that relationship. Not everyone, Chris, not everyone is going to be open
Right.
to what it's going to take. So I think the last part would be just commit to the process
Yeah.
and know that I wrote this down. A couple things that I was journaling on, or maybe consistency. The life that you and I want, and I think the life that anyone wants, is just on the other side of consistency.
That's good.
Doing whatever it is, whether it's lead generation, whether it's pouring into relationships, uh, it's the life that you and I want and dream about is just on the other side of consistency. And I think the other part would be this: start, like, just do it now. Start with the resources that I have. Start with where I am, and just do the best possible with what I have now. Because there's always going to be a better time to do it. There's always going to be something else that I could do. So it's this idea of start where I am right now.
Right.
Use what I have right now
Mhm.
and do the best possible with those things. And know that I wrote this down too. It's don't be perfect.
Mhm.
Just be better than I was yesterday.
Man,
Don't be
that's
perfect.
good.
Just be better than I was yesterday.
Hmm.
So
Um,
what do we have? Clarity,
hmm.
and then
Chunk it
chunking it
down.
down, and then just commitment. Just to do
Well,
whatever it
consistency.
takes.
We could have more than three C's.
A 4-part sermon?
Let's go.
Now we could be here past lunch, and then people are going to get upset.
Man, that's right.
They
Well,
think
when I
the
think
pastor's
about
going pretty long today.
when I think about commitment, Paul, I would say like commitment to take the initiative. Because one of the things that from my experience in relationships, it's kind of like playing ping pong where it's like okay, back and forth. And yet what I've discovered, like sometimes it's like it's me taking the initiative more than the other person. And for a while I got sideways about it. And yet I just decided, you know what? I can't control the action that that person takes or don't think or doesn't take. And oftentimes frustration or disappointment happens when there's often unspoken expectations or unclear expectations. So if I have this expectation that I never communicated, that hey, relationship to me means we play ping pong. I reach out to you, you reach out to me, and then we play back and forth like that. Where I think just committing to being the initiator in the relationship, man, it seems like that's a wise move, man. It almost sets me up for success, meaning I'm not having this unspoken expectation that somebody's gonna take the initiative back. I'm okay being the leader and just taking the initiative, man. Inviting for coffee or calling or yeah,
And it's the whole idea of, and sometimes this phrase is sometimes overused, and I think in this moment it applies, in that don't necessarily be attached to the outcome.
yeah, that's
Just
good.
attach and commit to the process, because
Mhm.
yes, there are going to be some people who are not going to respond. And it's this idea, and this is, I think, the other challenge with thinking about relationships in the right relationships, is not everyone's going to be in the circle
Yeah.
that I was referring to all the time. and
Right.
and and it's not a demotion or a downgrade if someone moves out or moves into a different area,
Mhm.
because just because that they might not be on our, again, we do it with customers in our sales business. We've got our top 25, we've got our
Right.
VIPs, and in sales business, what do we do with our top 25, or let's say our VIPs? What do we do with them? Do we spend more time with them?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Do we spend a little more money on them when we're
Hmm.
doing pop buys?
Right.
So I think the taboo part to all this, Chris, is when we think about our relationship part of our life,
Hmm.
like, and the purpose of the right relationships are to become the best version of ourselves. Just like the
Hmm.
purpose of business, if you're running a profitable business, the purpose of a business is to have a profit. Now, if you're running a nonprofit, then that's not the purpose. And yet, the
Sure.
purpose of a business is to turn a profit so you can create jobs and stimulate the economy. So when I think about the purpose of the right relationships, it's to make better humans.
Mhm.
So
I mean,
so let
Jesus even modeled that.
right. So
I
I,
mean, he
I
had
think
his
that
12, he had his 3, 5, and probably some groups I'm not even aware of. Like, he modeled that for us.
bingo. So I think it's the part of it is the taboo part of us characterizing or categorizing humans that from a relationship equity standpoint. And I think that's hard, and we need to give we need to give ourselves permission to to move people and rank, if you will, the relationship quality, and can we help this person be the best version of themselves, and vice versa. So I think that's the
Mhm.
taboo part. And again, I'm on this journey. I am by no means what some people would call an expert on relationships, for crying out loud. Like, I would be on the bottom of the list.
It's like Tony Robbins said, I'm not your guru.
Guru, that was the word I was looking for. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not the relationship guru,
Right. Just a
and
man
I
on the
am on the
journey.
journey, and
That's
it's
right.
fun, and it's fun, and it's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, thinking through like we are time is the equalizer for all of us, and time is limited. Even though I think all of us have enough of it to do exactly what God has in store for us to do, and yet we are limited by time. So when I think about where I'm choosing to invest time in relationships, I have to be a good steward of that because there's only so much time in a day, and I can't be all things to all people. And so I think it takes wisdom. It's like the difference between playing chess and checkers. It takes wisdom to think through it and be strategic in the relationships that I'm investing in. And I think it is taboo. I think you're right about that, because it sounds harsh. Because if I'm spending time with this person, if I'm saying yes here, that means I'm saying no elsewhere. And I just have to be okay and realize that that's okay. I'm investing with the people that I'm choosing to invest in, and just be okay with that.
And figure out a again, I've got college on my mind with Aubrey getting ready to go be
Wow.
a freshman. So I think like a rubric, or I think a grading scale for the relationships. Like, like we've got to know, how do we know if the relationship is plussing us or subtracting us? I'm not suggesting that we need to alienate the people that require us to put more effort into it. I'm not suggesting that. I'm
Mhm.
just suggesting that we know how these relationships impact us, and how we allocate our time, so that when we leave a conversation with somebody, like, be aware of, am I feeling excited, motivated, and more like the best version of myself, or am I tired? Do I need to sit and spend 15 minutes by myself and unpack all of this sort of stuff? Like, both
Right.
are okay.
Yeah.
And I think that as humans, we've got to be okay with pulling people through, like, and getting in the mud with them. And we also need people who are helping pull us through. So I think that's the other thing, Chris, is identifying the relationships, and putting it on some sort of point scale, so that we know uh, the energy that it's going to take to go into that meeting or that coffee appointment. And then also who can I meet with this afternoon or hang out with this afternoon, because I know that the morning of appointments are going to be draining, and before I go home, I want to hang out with more Chris Wards, and so that I can be like, okay, I'm feeling good, like I'm unstoppable now. So I think that's
Nice.
the other taboo part of why we can kind of steer away from being strategic in our relationships, is we feel like we're uh, stereotyping or grading humans, and that doesn't feel good.
Right. Yeah, I
So,
see what you're saying with that. One of the things I appreciate about you, Paul, is that um, I appreciate the fact that you think through things. When it comes to leaders I admire, I look back over my life and like there's a time where it's like, man, I just wanted to be around the leader that tells people what to do and then you just go and do that. They figure it out and people follow suit. The the more I increase in age, I don't say it the older I get. I'm avoiding that verbiage. So as I increase in age, being 41 now, when I just want to highlight this because you do this well, Paul. You think about things and you're a leader that that great leaders help people think, not tell them what to think. So I love our conversation because you got my wheels turning now, and I'm not at all surprised that you shared with us some of the thinking that you have behind this because you're a thinker, and I think thinking is at the heart of leadership. Jesus oftentimes answered people's questions with another question to cause them to think. And that is the hard work right there, thinking through things.
because we can go onto our computer and go into Chat GPT and
Mm-hmm.
say, what do I need to do to make $1 million? What do I need to
Right.
do? What does my email need to say? And yet Chat GPT isn't able to tell us how to think.
Right.
So
Good call on that. So, if there was one thing, reflecting on our conversation, if there was one thing that you hope somebody got out of past hour or so listening to us, what's one thing that you would hope somebody would walk away with?
it's a great. It's got to be one line, like one sentence, one something.
No, you can make it two,
I guess
three.
we can make it whatever we want.
Yeah.
I would say this, that stop waiting for the right relationship to come around and go create the right relationship.
Mm, that's good.
That's kind of what I would that's what I'm taking away from even just thinking about this, and even just almost listening and experiencing this. And Paul Teller is the what and the who. Paul is the one that's experiencing this. um and I would say that's what I'm experiencing is, stop waiting for the right person to come around, the
Hmm.
right relationships, and go create the right relationship. So with
And that's
that
good.
is I want people to take away that it's going to take work.
Hmm.
And I want people to take away some of the things that I'm learning, and that is there's got to be a plan, and I got to write the plan, and then I got to work the plan. I can't just hope relationships and success into being. I've got to work it and plan it, and 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 I would want someone to take away just this new level of thinking around relationships, and that is that I've got a lead generation plan, I've got a contract to close plan, I've got a plan, financial plan. I meet with my financial, all that, and I want people to take away that with the question of, could a plan around my relationships help me get to the next level? And if the answer is yes, then go after it. And if the answer is no, okay,
Right.
okay.
Sure.
Yet make a decision, because
Yeah.
it's like that's the point, is make a decision and say,
Yeah.
hey, am I going to double down and make 2025 the year of relationships, or am I not? And if the answer is no, it's fine. Just say yes to something
Decide.
else.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
decide. Exactly. Like, okay, fine. Like,
Make a
if
decision.
not relationships, then what? Okay, so like,
Right.
that would be the other thing, is I'm not attached to it. Just make a decision. Just decide on what it is. If not relationship plan and thinking critically around relationships, then what is it?
Yeah.
And as long as there's an answer to the then what, we'll be fine, right? They'll be fine.
Is there a book or a podcast channel that you've been listening to that's been helpful when it comes to relationships that you'd recommend?
Oh, yes, and you now have to be careful because I can only listen and read it. And you and I might have talked about it. I wouldn't even be surprised if you recommended it. Untethered Soul.
Untethered. That sounds familiar.
I'm telling you, it's because anything that like I've ever said, or especially if it's good, Chris, it's because I've either heard it from you or from Diana, or
Is that John Eldridge?
Michael Singer.
Okay, got it. Paul, thank you so much for your insight as being a man on the journey, sharing with us some of the things that you've been thinking about when it comes to intentionality and making decisions and thinking through the relationships that we choose to have or don't have. Thank you, man.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I appreciate the opportunity. Sometimes it's helpful to even process the journey and go from some of the notes that I have in my journals to be able to process them like this with you. So, man, I would say, of course, you're welcome, and thank you for letting me have some space to be able to process this. Because I would say this: the voices in my head and all the people inside of my head, we've been talking about this for a while, and yet this might be one of the first, definitely at least one of the first 5 times where all of the stuff has come out in a way that I can hear myself say it. So you're welcome, and thank you for allowing me to process and be vulnerable and share the things that I'm learning, because I now have a deeper understanding of where I am in this process, just as a result for just talking with you about it. So
And that's wonderful.
yeah,
Thank you, Paul.
of course, you're welcome.